Sorry, thanks, I had muted. Uh, Thank you, Air Marshal Matheswaram, General Brar, Dr. Pillai, and General Arun. Thank you for inviting me to this seminar and for requesting me to speak and share my thoughts on this very current and an important topic. Uh, you have mentioned, General Matheswaran, Air Marshal Matheswaran, about the new doctrine, so I won't go into that. But it is, as you mentioned, and as everybody says, it is a new doctrine, it is a new normal, and it has evolved in other ramifications as well, apart from the fact that we will regard terror as an act of war. The other implications of it are that there will be no talks necessarily if there is an act of terror, and whatever reaction we have to have may take place at any time in any form. And the other is that there will be no proposal for joint investigations. There will be no offer of sharing evidence, as was done earlier in the case of Pathankot and the case of Pulwama. The other response that we had earlier in the case of Sharm el-Sheikh, after the Mumbai attack in 2008, the two prime ministers met in Sharm el-Sheikh the following year, and there the joint statement said that dialogue is the only way forward. Now that has been discarded, that there is now a clear policy that we will react and we will choose our reaction the way we want to. And Pakistan will be left in a state of uncertainty about how India will react. And that, I think, is the doctrine that will really unsettle Pakistan. Now, when it comes to the global context, that is extremely interesting. That the global context today is quite different from earlier situations, in that the international order is in a state of flux. In fact, there are people who believe that the old international order has already, for all practical purposes, collapsed. And each of the three major powers is busy with its own major either war or preparation for war. In the case of Russia, it is involved in the Ukraine war. The US is involved neck deep in the Gaza war, Israel-Gaza war. And China is busy with its threats to Taiwan and the East China Sea, South China Sea. So this is a situation in which the countries of the world are not prepared to act in unison in any way against another new country or countries trying to go to war. And this is clear in the reactions that we had to our Operation Sindoor globally. When the terror attack took place on Pahalgam, there was universal condemnation. The Security Council met, and didn't meet. The members met informally, and they adopted a press statement. And even though Pakistan is a non-permanent member and China is a permanent member, the press statement was extremely strong, and it condemned the attack, and it called for action to be the perpetrators to be identified and prosecuted. So that reaction was a reaction that was felt by all the other members, the 4 permanent members other than China, and the 9 non-permanent members other than Pakistan. So that is a new normal for us in the global situation, in that we are no longer outvoted in the Security Council. If you go back to the 1971 war, the war started on the 3rd of December, and on the 4th of December, the Security Council met and tried to adopt considered a resolution calling upon the countries to cease fire immediately. And that resolution had to be vetoed by the Soviet Union. And then there were 2 other vetoes in a matter of another few days. So that global situation no longer prevails. Now, when India launched the Operation Sindoor, the only countries that can be said to have spoken up in a slightly critical manner were China and Turkey. China said it regretted the Indian military operation, and Turkey said that it would not, it supported Pakistan's call for uh, an investigation or a neutral or impartial investigation. All other countries spoke on expected lines. They called for de-escalation. They expressed concern at the escalation, and they called for restraint. Now, that's the normal reaction that any country would make to any kind of military escalation. So, globally, our position was fairly comfortable. One can't call it strong because the expressions of support that came to us came essentially from Israel, and it came from, to a certain extent, from France. Because France's statement was that it said that we understand India's desire to protect against the scourge of terrorism, which the other countries like UK, etc., did not do. But the US reaction was also extremely important because the US reaction from the vice president was that uh, it is none of our business, which meant it took a hands-off approach, which was not the situation in the earlier wars that we had fought. And the other, of course, was the more hilarious comment that came from President Trump, who talked about the war going on for 1,000 years or even longer, that we will ignore. So this is the new normal that we have, and the changed global context in which we were operating. Of course, it was helped by the fact, as you mentioned, that on the military front, the situation was always in our control. We led uh, uh, the escalation, and we were always in full control of the military situation, which meant that there was no fear of the situation getting out of control or spilling over into a nuclear confrontation. And in fact, although Pakistan did mention about its military of its nuclear strength, the fact is that neither country did any kind of saber rattling on the nuclear front. So this was, to a certain extent, reassuring for the rest of the world that the military situation, although there was military action taking place, it was not a situation that was out of control and in danger of exploding into a nuclear war or even a full-fledged war. Although there were some concerns expressed by countries like Japan. Now, you had asked about the. I'll come to the Indus Waters Treaty after this. I'll take about the Shimla agreement that you mentioned, and the fact that Pakistan has said that it will keep the Shimla agreement in abeyance. Now, the Shimla agreement, one can argue in different ways. Uh, it has kept the peace between our two countries. At the same time, we have to accept that the Shimla agreement did not really resolve the issues, especially what Pakistan calls the core issue between India and Pakistan, which is the Jammu Kashmir dispute, as Pakistan calls it. But the fact is that in the Shimla agreement, we agreed, in fact, both sides agreed, that they would not change or seek to change the line of control by force, that it could be changed only by mutual consent. Now, this was, in effect, an acceptance that the line of control was the de facto border between the two countries. But since it was not called the international border, therefore, it could not be the final resolution of the Jammu Kashmir issue was left uh, as a kind of an afterthought in the Shimla agreement. And Pakistan has picked upon this to say that the Jammu Kashmir issue still requires a final resolution for which dialogue must take place. But by keeping the Shimla agreement in abeyance, although they made essentially only one or two statements on this, and they have not reiterated that point later, because they realized that if they reopen the LOC and they say that they have the right to change it or we have the right to change it, then India, with its military superiority now, would be in a position to then take over militarily and rightfully what it claims. Because although India claims the occupied areas, India has not taken any military action since 1972 to recover that territory, which we rightfully claim as ours. Nor have we raised the matter in an effective way or done anything internationally to put pressure upon Pakistan to vacate that. So whereas Pakistan constantly raises the matter in the UN, our reference to Pakistan occupied Kashmir has essentially been in our general statements in the General Assembly, uh, which is more as a statement of policy than a statement of proposed action by us. Coming now to the Indus Waters Treaty, this may actually well become the most lasting consequence of this 4-day war. Because this war, as we know, was essentially a demonstration of our capability and a kind of a knock on the head for Pakistan. But we realized from the very beginning that these strikes would not put an end to terrorism. But the Indus Waters Treaty, for those who have gone through the treaty and have seen it in operation over the last, 60, 65 years, it is evident that this treaty was extremely unfair to India. It was extremely one-sided, and we gave up far more than we should have, either in terms of our fair share of the waters, and we did that without there being any international law on the sharing of river waters. Now, when you look at the fair share of water, what we got were the three rivers, what is called the eastern rivers, the rivers that flow through Punjab, starting from Himachal, going through Punjab and flowing to Pakistan, the Ravi, Jhelum, Ravi, Satluj, and Beas. And Pakistan got the three rivers of the north, or what they call the western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and the Chenab, with India being allowed a very limited amount of use of these waters. And India being allowed also to use some water for irrigation and some water for non-consumptive use of water for hydroelectric dams. Now, on paper, it seems that there were three rivers for India and three rivers for Pakistan. But the fact is that the waters of the eastern rivers, the rivers in Punjab, carried only 20% of the water. And 80% of the water are in the northern or the western rivers. And that is given almost entirely to Pakistan. Now, this is unfair because if you look at the share of the Indus Basin and the whole Indus Basin, which spreads across India, Pakistan, Tibet, and Afghanistan, Pakistan has 47% of the Indus Basin. It share the rest almost equally, 7%, 6% is the share. So technically, in terms of the share of the basin, we should have got at least 37, 38% of the water, but we did not. And Pakistan claimed the water essentially on the basis of what is called the concept of prior use. They said, see, if anybody who is familiar with the canal system in pre-partition Punjab knows that most of the canals were in West Punjab, but they drew their water from the eastern rivers, which is Ravi, Satluj, and Beas. So they claimed that since they were using the water much more than India was, therefore they had prior use. But prior use is only one of the disputed principles that is used in international law on the sharing of river waters. The other principle is called the Harmon principle, which was propounded by none other than the Attorney General of the US himself in a dispute with Mexico. And Mr. Harmon said that the country where the river flows, that country has sovereign rights over the water. So you have two completely divergent principles: sovereign rights of the upper riparian and prior use of the lower riparian. And in between these two, there is no agreement. There are some things called the Helsinki rules that were formed by the International Law Association, which is a non-government body. The UN has adopted an act which is called the convention, which is called the Water Courses Convention, but that's been ratified only by 43 countries. China has not ratified it, India has not, Pakistan has not. Bangladesh now plans to ratify it, but that's about all the situation. So you do not have a clear international law on the sharing of waters, and yet India has given up 80% of its water to the lower riparian. So this was, and in this, the rights of the people of Ladakh, Kashmir, and Jammu were completely sacrificed. So it was very unfair in terms of the overall sharing and totally unfair in terms of the rights of the people of Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh. So the Indus Waters Treaty should be kept in abeyance. And the other point about the Indus Waters Treaty, if I just have a few minutes, is that the Indus Waters Treaty, even though Pakistan got the 80% of the water, it got an excellent deal. Pakistan kept objecting to every project that we had that we are trying to build in Jammu and Kashmir. So our dams, are not our dams, our projects on the Jhelum River, on the Chenab, Pakistan kept objecting to them and dragging us to the dispute settlement mechanism. Twice we won in the dispute settlement mechanism, and yet Pakistan kept taking us back. Then we proposed to Pakistan that it's important to revise the treaty, to modify it, to bring it in line with new technology, and to remove some of the anomalies in it. And Pakistan completely rejected out of hand our proposal. Now, this treaty does not have a termination clause, which again is a violation of international law, because the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties says that if there is a fundamental change in circumstance, then a treaty can be revoked. But the Indus Waters Treaty does not have an exit clause. So I think it is against prevailing international law, and it is unfair to India. So the fact that we have kept it in abeyance, I hope, is the first step towards abrogating the treaty and telling Pakistan that if they want to have any kind of cooperation, then they must come and negotiate a new treaty with us, which will be fairer and take into account our interests. Thank you.